How is school treating you?
Good. Hello, how are we doing today? We're here with a very special guest who needs no introduction, so I won't give him one. How are you doing, Walter?
Pretty good. Happy to be on your show again, Daniel.
Always loving having you. They say the best introductions are the shortest, so I
That
figured
was,
what could be shorter than no introduction?
that was pretty short.
All right. Let's talk about your favorite person on the planet right now. Your man, Trump.
My man, Donald.
Still regretting that decision?
Well, I'm sort of ambivalent I did start this thing called Libertarians for Trump.
Right.
We got something like 4,500 signers, and then I started a thing called Scholars for Trump. You didn't have to be a libertarian, just a scholar, a PhD, something like that. On the ground that they were the bad guys, the anti-Trumpers, were saying, well, the only people that vote for Trump are people with an IQ of room temperature, and they're all deplorable dummies. So I wanted to get some PhDs, and I shouldn't say I, because I had co-sponsors on both of these, and we got maybe 150 signups. So I was pro-Trump, mainly because I was anti-Hillary, and Trump said some good things. He said he wouldn't go into Libya, he wouldn't go into Syria, he wouldn't go into Afghanistan. He was a little weak on foreign trade, but what the heck, you can't have everything. And foreign policy is more important than domestic policy. So I was sort of in favor of him. And I had a debate with several people, Bob Wenzel on the Tom Woods show, and I was defending my man Donald. And then what he did is he bombed Afghanistan with some big bomb. And then he bombed some Syrian airport. And I sort of got ticked off at him. And I said, we should really impeach him. The problem with that is if we impeach my man, the Donald, what do we get? We get Pence.
True.
And, Pence is, I think, more of a warmonger than Donald, even though Donald had these two aberrations. And now, the most recent thing I did on Donald is the Paris, climate change thing. My man Donald got out of that, which was magnificent. And I wrote something, thank God for Donald, So I'm back in the flock, or whatever they call that. I'm back in the pack. Right. I'm a Donaldite. And I'm forgiving him his two aberrations in Afghanistan and in Syria. And I hope he won't do it anymore. And okay, he's still a little weak on foreign trade, but his heart is in the right place. He wants jobs for people, for the deplorable people. And, so I'm sort of crossing my fingers behind my back and supporting Donald. He's our president.
Right. I guess we have very different views, because my views are sort of like, maybe I'll use Hitler as an extreme example. But so if Hitler, let's say, gives to charity, I'll acknowledge the good he's doing, but the bad he's doing is really bad. So I'll say, you know what? When he does good, I'll acknowledge it, but I'm still going to say he's Hitler, and I'm not supporting him. So I guess my own view is, if someone's really atrocious, when he does good, fine, maybe I'll acknowledge he does good, but I'm still going to say I don't back him, where it seems like you're saying, no, I'm going to back him, but when he does bad, I'll acknowledge the bad.
Okay, we do have this different way of looking at it, but look, Hitler only killed 11 million people. a mere 11 million people. Now I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but it was only a stinking lousy 11 million, whereas our man Stalin gets credit for 20 million. So if there was a choice between Hitler and Stalin, and we want to save human lives, which we both do, we would support our man Hitler, right?
We would criticize both and say Stalin's worse. I think.
Okay, fair enough. But Donald, Donald is no Hitler.
Yeah, but look, in many ways, Hitler's. I would say in many ways Hitler's sort of different than Stalin, because Stalin, he just killed people. Hitler would experiment on. Hitler's men would experiment on people. They would torture people. I think in many ways, being sadistic, even if you kill fewer of them, it makes you a more despicable human being than if you just do a quick, painless death.
Well, then we can take our Uncle Mao. Uncle Mao is credited with 60 million. 60
Sure.
million's a lot of people.
That's true.
But look, I think that this conversation is problematic because Donald is no Hitler, he's no Stalin, he's no Mao. He hasn't killed, well, he's killed a few people that he shouldn't have in Afghanistan, and a few people in Syria. And also, he said he'd pull troops back. He sounded almost like Ron Paul.
Right. Well, who cares what people say?
Well, I mean, when it was Hillary versus Donald, I mean, Hillary was way worse.
Right.
Hillary is a monster. I mean, Hillary is way worse. Okay, look, we have a choice between Hillary and Donald, and we have to pick Donald. Now, while we're picking Donald, we might as well say something nice about him instead of saying he's a son of a bitch, but he's better than Hillary. We might as well say, yay, Donald. I mean, if you want to get behind the lesser of two evils,
yeah,
you might as well say something nice. Whereas the way you're going to do it is you're going to say, well, he's an abomination, but he's a lesser of an abomination, and he did this good thing. He patted a dog sometime or whatever. Right. And I don't know. It seems to me that if you're going to support Donald against Hillary, you might as well say something nice about him. And there were nice things to say about him. And look, he hasn't started any new wars. Hillary probably started 3 new wars by now, and Pence also. So, thank God for Donald. And look, he pulled out of Paris. Hillary never would have pulled out of Paris.
That's true.
So, it's not just like he patted a dog. I mean, pulling out of Paris, the left went berserk. Everyone went berserk. So, we libertarians have to support our man Donald because, they're howling at him. They're at his throat. They're trying to impeach him for doing stuff, that he has every right to do, the stuff with Comey and all. I mean, according to, what's his name, Dershowitz, the Harvard professor of law.
Yeah.
According to him, and he sounded sensible to me on this, Donald have every right to fire Comey, to tell Comey, look, don't go after this other guy. I'm giving him a pardon. So Donald didn't do anything really bad on that. And also, look at his enemies. They say by his enemies you can judge a man. Look at his enemies, the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the MSNBC, CBS, ABC. The New York Times is his enemy, so he can't be all bad. He's got to be a good guy because the New York Times hates him. And, he's sort of attacked by everybody. And, he's sort of almost like the underdog. Poor Donald, he's under.
Do you feel that way about Friends?
Friends?
Well, let's, so I have this view, and I've been criticized for it. I know Kinsella has criticized me for it, but my own view is you can also judge a person not just by their enemies, but who they choose to associate with, right? So to use an extreme example, let's say I'm friends with someone who turns out to be a rapist. And let's say, to make matters even more interesting, the rapist rapes someone that I'm friends with. Well, if I say, this person raped me, or a friend says, this person raped me, and my reply is, well, they were very nice to me and they didn't rape me, so I'm still going to be their friend. I would say that sort of makes you a shitty friend. Why, right? If you're knowingly friends with pricks, I think that's a reflection on you.
Okay, I agree. The people he picked were a lot of neocons, and they're not rapists, but, well, they're sort of rapist-ish. You got a good point there. So my support for Donald is mixed. I'll agree. I'm not a total Donaldite. I mean, he's just better than the alternative.
All right. So two more.
There was this wonderful South Park. There was an election of the kids, and one was a shit sandwich, and one was
giant turd and a dude.
Giant turd. And the boys were, do you favor the shit sandwich or the giant turd?
Well, to quote from the movie Wet Hot American Summer, there's a scene where this guy's hitting on this girl, and she calls him a douchebag. And he goes, douchebags are hygienic products. I take that as a compliment. Thank you.
There's my man. Okay,
so I think a giant douche is better than a turd sandwich.
Okay, great.
Okay. Anyway, two other topics I'm interested in discussing. So I don't know if you've ever been to Pork Fest. I was there twice, and I gave speeches. And I'm trying to give one this year. I don't know if it's going to work. Called "Libertarians Are Assholes," and the basic idea behind the speech is one of the things that I've noticed among a lot of libertarians, which I don't really like because I find it both not very effective if you want to bring people to liberty, and also not even particularly true, is this sort of self-righteousness that simply by being an anarchist, I'm better than anyone who believes in the state. And my own view, and I'm curious what yours is, are two things. A, actions speak louder than words. So I don't care what your views are, I care how you behave. And two, the non-aggression principle, following the non-aggression principle isn't sufficient to be a good person, right? To use two examples, what's worse? Not from a libertarian point of view, but from a moral point of view. Stealing, let's say, a penny, or verbally abusing your child for a decade, so he has very low self-esteem. Well, according to the non-aggression principle, it's just words, but according to, I think, basic morality, your verbal abuse against your child is worse. So I think that simply following the non-aggression principle or simply being against the state is not sufficient to be a morally superior human being. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think you're making excellent points. Murray Rothbard made a very similar point against David Friedman. He said David Friedman is an anarchist, but he doesn't hate the state. He just sees the state as inefficient and bumbling and ineffective, but he doesn't see it as vicious and an abomination. And Murray said he'd rather have a minarchist who hated the state for going past minarchism than to have David Friedman who doesn't hate the state. So I agree with you on that point. And secondly, I agree with you also on the non-aggression principle. It's necessary but not sufficient to be a good person. If you verbally abuse your baby, I mean, that's pretty despicable. Even, well, it might be child abuse, but suppose you're just on this side of the line of child abuse, you're not really child abusive,
right?
Which would be a violation of rights.
Right.
But you do it for 10 years and now the kid's a wreck at age 10 or age 11 or whatever. That's really much worse than stealing a penny in terms of morality. I agree with you, but now to say that libertarians are assholes.
Well, I'm being a bit colorful.
Well, okay, I'm not against that. I favor colorfulness too. My defending the undefendable books are colorful. Right. But I would say be more moderate. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. Some libertarians are assholes.
You're right. So for example, let me just give an example. There was a case recently and some libertarian went a bit farther than I went. And so I guess I'll bring this case to you. There was a case where a guy was depressed and was thinking of committing suicide, and his girlfriend at the time, now she's charged with, I think, second-degree murder, which she shouldn't be. But the case was basically, he was depressed and suicidal, and she was basically saying, people are going to miss you for a little, but it's okay, and if you want to do it, you should do it. And he was in the car having carbon monoxide, and he decided to get out because it was working, and his girlfriend's like, go back in the car and try to commit suicide. Now, the libertarian said she's not guilty of committing a crime because it's just words. And I agree. But he went farther, and this is where I think he's wrong. And she's like, she provided a service. He was suicidal, and she just wanted to figure out the most economically efficient way to carry it out. And my response is, what are you talking about? If someone's in a fragile emotional state, your job as a compassionate girlfriend, if you love a person, is not to egg them on. It's to try to convince them to not go through with it. You're right. It's sort of like that joke where the guy jumps off a bridge and he's like halfway through, he realized it was a bad idea. People have regrets. So just because she's not guilty legally doesn't mean she's not guilty morally.
Well, I agree with you, but I want to correct one typographical error on your part.
Go ahead.
When you say it's just words, therefore it can't be a crime. We libertarians, I think, do not hold that view. There are crimes that consist just of words.
Well, the threat of violence, I guess, sure.
Yeah, right. Okay. But apart from that, I agree with you entirely. I mean, if you say, give me your money or I'll shoot you, and you're serious about it, whereas right now, obviously, I'm not serious about that, that would be a crime.
Right.
Milton Friedman rejected libertarianism on the following ground. And he accurately assessed libertarianism as being based as a core foundation principle, the non-aggression principle. And he says, look, suppose I see somebody at a bridge and he's about to commit suicide. I'm going to grab him and I'm going to hold him and I'm going to try to, tell him not to do that. And therefore, I'm violating the non-aggression principle. So the hell with the non-aggression principle. The correct libertarian view is, if I saw you, Daniel, at the bridge and you were about to jump off, I would grab you and I would, you're bigger and stronger than me, but I would do my best to grab you and not allow you to jump. And then I'd say, well, why are you jumping? And if you said, well, my girlfriend left me, or I got a bad mark on the exam or something like that, I would keep you for a day or two or three and try to convince you that there are other girls, there are other exams, whatever. Right. On the other hand, if you said, look, I'm in excruciating pain, I have terminal cancer, the morphine no longer works, it's just a living hell, I would let you go because, what the heck? I mean, life under those circumstances is pretty grim. But I would be a criminal. I would be a kidnapper. So I reject Milton Friedman's rejection of libertarianism because we libertarians can fold that scenario into our theory. Yes, I'm a criminal. I kidnapped you for 3 days. And hopefully any private court would distinguish my criminality from other kind of criminality. And they would give me a slap on the wrist, but they should give me some sort of slap on the wrist, especially if you complained about this and brought me up to court on charges and say, well, Block kidnapped me. So I would reject Milton Friedman's rejection of libertarianism on that ground, but I agree with you that what this woman or young girl did was despicable. I wouldn't want to be her friend. I would ignore her. I would boycott her. I wouldn't have anything to do with her. I think she's a despicable human being. She's not a criminal. Right. We libertarians make that distinction. Not everything bad. Criminality doesn't exhaust nastiness.
Right. And when I told this to the person replied, well, I thought libertarians believe it's good that people get what they want, and in this case, he wanted suicide. And my response is, since when do libertarians say it's good that people get what they want? Libertarians only believe in the freedom to get what they want as long as they don't initiate violence. You can say, I think the consumer is an idiot. This movie's a piece of crap. How come it made millions of dollars? You can say, how come this business went bankrupt? It's a great product. Being pro-free market isn't being pro every choice the consumer makes. You can poo-poo all you want.
Well, I agree. I mean, I like Mozart and Bach, and I think rap music is a contradiction in terms. Right. But people, but as a libertarian or as a decent person, the presumption is people should get whatever they want. But, but there are bad things. Look, we favor the legalization of prostitution and the legalization of heroin. But that doesn't mean that we advocate going to a prostitute or becoming a prostitute, or we advocate people using heroin. I think that prostitution is not good, and people should get together and go to bed with each other for other reasons than commercial, namely because they love each other or they like each other or something like that. But they're not criminals if they go to bed for money. And similarly, I think that if you have heroin, use heroin, sell heroin, buy heroin, whatever, you're not a nice person and you shouldn't do it. But on the other hand, you're not a criminal. So we have to make that very sharp distinction. And it's a basic distinction. And we make it over and over again, and yet people don't realize it. Don't realize the power of that distinction. Now, I think in general purposes, everyone should get what they want. But there are exceptions. The exceptions are, heroin, prostitution, suicide, whatever. That is suicide for silly reasons. Right. Not suicide for excruciating pain and terminal cancer kind of reasons. I think we would agree on that.
No, I would agree. Although I've often referred to prostitution as the cheapest way to have sex.
Well, that's a good one. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Go ahead.
That's a good one.
It's although I don't talking about suicide. I don't know if you've seen the great movie by Woody Allen, Deconstructing Harry, where a person commits suicide and the suicide note says, "I've gone out the window." So straight into the point.
Yeah. No, I haven't.
I would say look up if I wrote a suicide note. But no, I mean, I agree. I think you can have moral qualms. Look, adultery is not a violation of the non-aggression principle, and yet we could say it's immoral because if you love your spouse, you should be faithful, right? So I think that, Adam Smith talked about 3 types of justices, and he said only, commutative justice you can get through force, but there are other types of justices too. Now, you can't use them through force, but that doesn't mean those other justices don't exist.
I agree.
The non-aggression principle is not. If you let me put it this way: if you're only a libertarian, if you only follow the non-aggression principle, you're a piece of shit.
Well, no.
Not sufficient.
You're such an extremist. Let me modify that. If you're only a libertarian, you may be a piece of shit.
Okay.
You're not necessarily a piece of shit. But
if you only follow the non-aggression principle, that implies that you're verbally abusive. It implies that you commit adultery. It implies that you engage in all sorts of things that don't violate the non-aggression principle, but are still, look, I'm lying, so you can't trust me. Is that a violation of the non-aggression principle? No, but it's still, I would argue, in most cases, not a great way to behave.
Well, I don't think we have any real dispute here. We're just having a terminological dispute as to how to characterize this. But in terms of the idea, I agree with you entirely.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting because I remember once, I think it was my sister who's a dirty socialist. Well, not, smelling wise. I think she's clean, but, she has her views, which are socialist. And she said to me once, I don't understand you, Daniel, because, you're a big advocate of freedom of speech. And yet, you've been bullied throughout elementary and high school. I know people watching this find that hard to believe. A guy is me, bullied, what? But I was bullied throughout elementary and high school. And I have to tell you, based on someone who was emotionally, physically, psychologically, and verbally abused, I prefer physical abuse. I would prefer, throwing desks on top of me over people trying to destroy my self-esteem or playing mind games with me. So my sister said, if you feel that way, why do you believe in, freedom of speech? And my response is because it's not proportional, right? If someone calls you, let's say, fat, or someone insults you, I don't think you have a right to stab the person, but that doesn't mean you should say, well, just because you have a right to do it doesn't mean we have to praise your actions. So if someone's psychologically abusive to you, respond in psychologically abuse and back. Respond proportionally.
Right. The problem with bullies, though, if you say you're a big fat bully, then you get a punch in the nose. But that is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Right.
That's true. How do you deal with the bullies who do not violate the non-aggression principle in a way that won't get you pummeled? It's an interesting idea, hard theory. I don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I think that libertarians should stress proportionality more than the non-aggression principle. Because I think that's really what libertarianism is.
Well, I don't know. What do you mean by proportionality?
That you should respond in kind. That if someone's verbally abusive to you, respond verbally. If someone's physically abusive, respond physically.
Or ignore the person.
Sure.
If you
but if you choose not to ignore, let's say.
Look, as Murray Rothbard is fond of saying, libertarianism is not a theory of life. Right. It's just a theory of the just use of violence. It's a very narrow, think of a pizza pie. It's just a narrow slice of life. The pizza pie is life. And you got a thin slice, and that it's an important slice, but it's a thin slice, and it determines on what conditions it's legitimate to use violence against people. There's a lot more to life than that.
I agree.
And you shouldn't conflate that little bit of life with all of life. And you're right, a lot of people do that, and I think that your speech at the Pork Fest will be a good speech.
Hopefully, if they let me speak.
But don't say all libertarians are assholes. Just
well, one of the things that I thought of saying, if they let me speak as my opening, is to say, I'm a libertarian, and I'm also an asshole. So, and I've been both for quite a lot of time, so I've done a lot of self-study. And I could tell just looking in this room, to paraphrase John Lennon, you may say I'm an asshole, but I'm not the only one.
Well, you know, I wouldn't say you're an asshole or I'm an asshole. I would say that sometimes we've done asshole-ish things.
Well, you have to be in life, I think. Otherwise, people walk all over you.
Well, no. I mean, if you're a defensive asshole, that's okay. But we're all imperfect human beings.
Yes. You know what my definition of an asshole is?
No.
Someone who gets more upset at being called an asshole than for acting like an asshole.
That's a good one. But yeah, just reiterate that point. We're all imperfect human beings. We all make mistakes. Even libertarians. Look, before I became a libertarian, I would steal stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And you know, when I became a libertarian, what I did is I went to every store that I could remember that I stole stuff from, and I paid them money. And sometimes I even hurt them because I used to be a waiter in hotels and in the what do you call it? Not the Adirondacks, the Catskills. I lived in New York City, and I would steal stuff. And then what I would do is I'd say, well, I stole $50 worth from this hotel. So I'd send them a check for $50. And that probably caused them $500 worth of cost, because they would then write me, well, we got your reservation. When are you coming? You know, stuff like that. But I didn't know else how to do it.
Right.
So, you know, and even after I became a libertarian, I didn't become a perfect person. I did things I regret. But that's human life. So becoming a libertarian is no guarantee that you're a nice person.
I agree.
On the other hand, probably there's a correlation that libertarians are nicer on average than other people, although I'd hate to.
Not in my experience.
Well, you know, one of my favorite sayings is to know them is to hate them. And you probably hang around more with libertarians than the average person hangs around with libertarians, because libertarians are only, what, 1%, 2%, 5% of the population. And probably most of your friends and colleagues and acquaintances are libertarians. So you hang around with more libertarians than the average guy. The average guy doesn't know from a libertarian. He's interested in beer and pizza or bowling or something like that. So you're probably getting a negative view of an overly negative view of libertarians because you hang around with them, and human beings are imperfect, and you see the imperfection. Go out to the deplorable areas where there are non-libertarians, and to the coasts where there are non-libertarians, and hang around with them, and you'll find that they're equally, if not more, despicable.
Right. Sort of like your view on drugs and taxes. I sort of say that I'm a libertarian, despite the fact that I converse with libertarians. Because of it.
Well, on the other hand, there's some very, very nice people who are libertarians, and that they've made both of our lives much better. So,
I think you're a good person. Look, I'm not saying all libertarians are assholes. I'm not saying that libertarians. Someone once said to me, "You're a self-hating libertarian," and I said, "No, it's other libertarians I hate." And I said, "Look, I'm not saying that I hate every libertarian. And I'm not saying that every libertarian is better than every non-libertarian. I'm saying the libertarian itself doesn't determine whether... Look, to me, being a good human being isn't based on what you say. It's based on what you do. So I don't care what your moral philosophy is. I care how do you treat people in your personal life. I don't care what you say.
Isn't it both?
It's always cheap. Huh?
Isn't it both? I mean, suppose Bernie Sanders... by the way, did I tell you that I went to high school with Bernie Sanders? And we were
on track, right?
Yeah, now Bernie Sanders was a nice guy, and I think he still is a nice guy personally, although he's an imperfect human being, so I'm sure he's got some flaws. But he was a nice guy. But what he was saying was pretty bad. So you see, you're such an extremist. I'm such a moderate.
What would you say has greater weight? How's that?
Well, it's you can't say greater or lesser. It's always at what margin.
Well, let's use this example. There are two people. I like rape. So, well, let me rephrase that. I like rape analogies. I don't want the New York Times. Daniel Rothschild likes rape. Although I've never tried it, so I may like it. I've heard there's typically at least one disappointed party. Anyway, okay. So suppose there are two people. One person says rape is never justified, but rapes. And acknowledges rape wasn't justified when I did it, but I don't care. I enjoy raping, and I don't particularly care that it's immoral. And the other person says rape is sometimes justified, but has never raped. Ceteris paribus, all else equal, who would you say is the better person?
Well, I agree with you that the person who speaks badly is the better person. But still, Bernie Sanders speaks badly pretty much every word out of his mouth, except when he orders coffee or stuff like that. Uh, he is so bad verbally that has to count too.
I'm not saying it doesn't count.
Okay.
I'm saying actions. It's sort of weird, right? There's this contradiction. The pen is mightier than the sword, but actions speak louder than words. Which one is it?
Well, you see, the problem with this is we're violating the marginalist principle, the Diamond's water paradox.
Right.
You say there are two people, one does this and one does that. You're in the back of undermining this argument is the Diamond's water paradox. We never make a choice between all of water and all of diamonds.
Right.
We only make a choice between a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And what you're doing is you're saying, well, suppose this person is really, really great verbally. In other words, you're giving me all or none stuff. And what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't be all. Sometimes we can be all or none-ish. It's okay. But in order to be more accurate, we should also take the marginalist revolution of Jevons and Menger and who was the third guy? The French guy?
Ross.
Ross, whatever. Would take that into account too. So you're too much of an all or none guy. You're giving me, well, the Hitler versus this guy and this and what I'm trying to do is be more moderate or more marginal-ish.
That's true.
And say that both count, and it depends on where you are in the margin. So I agree with your sentiment, but I just think you're going too far off the ranch. You're being too extreme. You're such an extremist.
Maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe it's just I don't like the self-righteousness among a lot of libertarians who seem to believe because they're a libertarian, therefore they're morally superior. And I say that's not true.
Other ceteris paribus, they are. It's just that you don't want to have any.
But it's not ceteris paribus.
Ceteris paribus, libertarians are more moral than anyone else because, at least in terms of verbiage, which is important, not all important, but important, they are way better. Bernie Sanders and Hillary and Donald are horrible.
I don't disagree with that, but people are not ceteris paribus.
Well,
so I'm saying not ceteris paribus. You being a libertarian doesn't cancel out how you may treat people in your day-to-day life.
It cancels out a little bit. See, I'm being a marginalist, and you're saying it doesn't cancel out at all. And you're such an extremist. It cancels out a little bit, doesn't it?
Maybe a sliver.
Well, 3 ounces. Now,
am I a better person now that I've become a libertarian? I don't know.
Yes, damn it. Libertarians are good people, better than most, because assuming that they act the same way as everyone else, at least they say some good things. Right. And that's got to count when we go to heaven. And St. Peter is asking us, what'd you do down on earth? And we say, well, I was a libertarian. He's got to give us a few extra points.
Yeah. Oh, I heard this joke recently about heaven or hell. I thought you might like it. Where this guy dies, goes to heaven, and the guy at the gate says, sorry, you're not on the list. You have to go down. Hell. This guy goes to hell. The guy in hell says, sorry, you're not on the list. We're going to have to send you back down to earth. He goes, please don't send me back to my wife. Just let me in.
That's a good one.
But yeah, I'd rather, I don't believe in an afterlife, obviously, but if out of a heaven or hell, I'd rather go to heaven because I hate large crowds.
No, but they have lemonade fountains and cotton candy trees.
Although in all the movies you see, heaven seems so boring, and hell, besides for the climate, seems more interesting.
Well, I'm in New Orleans, so the climate's not going to bother me.
That's true. You're used to it. You're like, yeah, this feels like home. Hell.
But you see my point that libertarianism does give you some credit.
Okay, maybe. Sure, it gives me some credit.
Okay, that's it. Now, how much credit? I don't know. We Austrians don't believe in udals, and we don't believe in measuring credits. But there's some credit to being a libertarian. You can't reject that, I don't think, and be just.
Okay. No, I guess that's true. No, I'm not. Obviously, why would you be a libertarian otherwise? There's certainly not a lot of benefit to having a philosophy that's fringe. You're going to isolate a lot of people. So I'm sure there's certainly.
I once wrote an article, Why Be a Libertarian? And I forget, I had 5 reasons. One was, to make a better world, get rid of the minimum wage and we'll have less unemployment for unskilled workers. And another one was to pay back Murray Rothbard for what he did to me. He handed me a baton, and I'm trying to hand it to you and other young people. That's another reason. And there were 2 or 3 other reasons, but the one that really stuck out at me, it is the most glorious, gorgeous thing aesthetically. It's better than Mozart and Bach put together. And Mozart and Bach are, heavenly. Right. And libertarianism is even more beautiful than that. It's the most gorgeous, exquisite aesthetic jolt that you can possibly get. Of all the 5 reasons that I listed in this article, I wish I remembered the others. That's the one that really gets me going. It's just so glorious. It's you just can't ignore it. I have a tropism toward liberty. It's the most fulfilling thing in my life, more than a baby smile or a sunset or a prism or a rainbow or any. It's beautiful. Right. It's a lovely thing, and I hate to see you disparage libertarianism so much. Yes,
I'm not disparaging it. No, I like libertarianism.
Okay,
I'm disparaging libertarians.
I get it, but libertarians and libertarianism are not totally unrelated.
Well, you've read you've read James Buchanan's article. What should economists do? And people say, what is economics? And some people replied, what economists do? What? That's a ridiculous definition. So I make a distinction between libertarianism as the philosophy, which is nice and beautiful, and the people, which are good in spurts.
Well, a lot of spurts.
Okay. I'm not saying I'm not, it's, maybe I have some self-loathing. It's interesting because when I was, so the first time I signed up for it, I didn't want to. I was at some festival, I think in 2011, 2012, Anarchy in New York City. I was going to the bathroom and some good-looking woman follows me into the bathroom, like, wow, about time. And she's like, do you want to sign this? I'm like, damn it. That's why you followed me into the bathroom. And I'm like, what is this? And she's like, well, it's to move to New Hampshire. And I'm not going to let you leave until you sign it. Then I really had to go, so I did. And then someone later is like, are you going to move to New Hampshire? And I'm like, I could spend like a week surrounded by libertarians, but I don't know if I want to live with you people all the time.
Well, I think that on average, they'd be better.
They'd be better. Maybe.
We have to adopt ceteris paribus.
I also like disagreeing with people, so it's not fun when I agree with people.
Well, New Hampshire, I think, has only got, what, 5, 10%, 15% libertarians? Maybe. There'd be plenty of non-libertarians for you to interact with there.
That's true. Yeah, I also like feeling like I'm the most extreme person in the room. And I enjoy the idea of feeling like the most, out there. So when I'm surrounded by libertarians, I feel less special, maybe.
Well, you're the most extreme person in this conversation.
Okay, 50%. It's not bad, I guess. All right, let's see what else. We're going to talk about. I think we talked about the human shield last time, so I don't really want to talk about that. So, if the average person, says to you, look, why should I, beyond just it being a good philosophy, having any philosophy which is fringe might isolate me from a lot of people, and I care about, let's say, being popular. I don't want to be a pariah. And yet it seems like libertarianism is increasing, but so is the state. So it's not like the increase in libertarians is bringing an increase in liberty. So even though the philosophy is good, why should I have a philosophy which might isolate me from people, might have people think I'm crazy, and it's not like me being a libertarian is leading to more liberty? What would you say to people who say that?
Well, I've got several things that what you just said trigger in my mind. I have to give you a trigger warning, I guess.
Uh-oh.
That's a whole other issue. A statement of Milton Friedman that really inspired me was, We libertarians, all of us put together, ever since Adam Smith or before, because of our actions, tariffs are 0.1% lower than they otherwise would be. And with that, punchline, we've paid for our salaries 10,000 times over. And I thought that was a very nice thing about economists, and it applies to libertarians too. Because of all the libertarian activity, the minimum wage law is 1 cent lower than it otherwise would be. Marijuana is legalized a little bit more than it otherwise would be. And with that, we've paid for our salaries 10,000-fold. So yes, we libertarians have contributed, even though we're 1 or 2 or 3% of the U.S. population, and probably 0.1% of the world's population, because there are more libertarians in the U.S. than elsewhere. I don't think you have too many in Africa or, I don't know, Asia or whatever. And yet we've done good work. So we can be proud of ourselves. We've made the world a little bit of a better place, given that we're so few. Another point I wanted to make in response to what you just said is, when I first met Murray Rothbard in 1966, I asked him how many libertarians were there in the world, and he said 25. And he'd be in a reasonably good position to know who the libertarians were, because he was sort of the spider in the spider web. And 25? I mean, you go to any libertarian supper club and there are 25. We are, the gays used to say we are everywhere. Well, we libertarians are everywhere. There are thousands of us, tens of thousands of us, maybe even millions of us. So in one sense, we're doing better than we did in 1966 or in 1922, when there were, I don't know, 5 libertarians or however many there were then. So we're on the upsurge. On the other hand, we had a vote between Donald Trump and Hillary, and we have the New York Times, and we have bad people all around the world. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's hard to say whether we're making progress. In some ways, we're making gigantic progress. In other ways, not so much. But when you say not so much and things are going to hell in a handbasket, we can always say, well, they'd be going to hell in a handbasket 1 mile an hour faster than they otherwise would be, but for the libertarians, holding up the handbasket from going into hell. So again, I'm taking what I see as a moderate position here. Yes, there's more work to be done, and what we're now doing is part of this, because you're going to broadcast this on the web, and people will hear this, and maybe some of them will be inspired by our conversation. So, we're all working toward this end, and I think it's a glorious thing that what we're doing.
Yeah, someone asked me once if you could, what is it, the blue pill, the red pill, I forget which one. If you could go back, and be, well, I don't know if I was ever really a statist. I think I've always hated authority, or I think a minarchist was as far gone as I've been. But, if you could go, let's say, to not hating the state for at least a few hours or a few days, would you? And sometimes I'm tempted to answer, it's really depressing when you have this horrible enemy. You're aware it's an enemy, and you're also aware that resistance seems futile, right? Like, at least, there's some emotional benefit, if not a moral one, in believing, oh, the state's going to take care of you, and if we just get the right guy in office, things will be okay, right? There is that emotional appeal. I think that's one of the reasons, the great philosopher Mark Twain said it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled, because to convince people that they've been fooled, they have to say, man, I was an idiot for falling for that. And for a lot of people, that ego depletion is too much for them to handle. So they'd rather just continue to be brainwashed than have to say, man, I was a real schmuck. So I think in some sense, and I don't know how you feel, there are some days where I feel like, it's really depressing to have this horrible enemy. The majority of people think it's not an enemy, it's a savior. And it seems like we're not getting rid of it anytime soon.
Well, I had 2 remarks. It's interesting. Everything you say triggers things in me, and it's a delightful conversation. It's always good to be with you on these things, and I hope in another month or 2 we'll do it again.
Likewise.
One, I want to give you another typographical error correction. You said something to the effect that we're against authority. we're not against authority. We're only against coercive authority. I mean, there's voluntary authority. I mean, I used to play the violin in an orchestra, and the conductor was very authoritarian. The conductor, whenever I squeaked on my violin, he'd stop the whole thing, and, you know, with his little thing, and he'd hit the podium and say, block, shape up. And the wind instruments, he would even tell them when to breathe. In the score, you know, the trumpet doesn't just breathe whenever he damn well feels like it. He breathes when it says that he can breathe, and you can't be more authoritarian than that. Even the slave master didn't tell the slaves when to breathe. He told them when not to breathe, but he didn't tell them when to breathe. So we're not against authority. But the other thing is Ron Paul. You know, if Ron Paul almost made it. You know, in what was it? 12 and 08, he ran for president on the Republican ticket, and there were maybe 15 people when Romney took it. Well, he was the last one standing apart from Romney. So he almost made it. I mean, and if Romney had been hit by the proverbial bus, Ron Paul might have been the Republican candidate. He might have won. And, you know, we came that close. And now we have Rand Paul. Okay, Rand Paul is no Ron Paul. The acorn went too far away from the tree.
Or the horse, as they say in Swiss.
I'm sorry? I didn't hear you.
The Swiss expression is the apple doesn't fall far from the horse.
Ah, okay. That's a good one. But he, you know, he's probably the most libertarian senator we've ever had, with the exception of Bora, maybe. I'm not sure about that, but he's certainly the most libertarian senator we've now got. It's conceivable that in the year 2020, he will run and beat Donald if Donald tries to become a Republican candidate again. And, you know, Rand Paul is pretty damn good. You have to give him a B+ or an A-. I mean, and that's magnificent. So, you know, it's possible that things will be much better because, you know, the president has a lot of power in foreign policy. If Ron Paul were president, I'm sure that every last U.S. soldier would have been withdrawn back to the U.S. We would have had a very strong Coast Guard. Ron Paul believes in defense, and he can distinguish defense from offense. So, you know, things are not that bad. There's a possibility that Rand Paul will become more Ron-ish, and in 2020 he might become the next president of the United States. And yes, he's imperfect. He's an imperfect human being, and he's got flaws, and he's no Rothbard, and he's no Ron Paul, but he might get better. And if he were president, my goodness gracious, this world would be a much safer place, a much richer place, a much better place in many ways, even though Rand Paul, again, is an imperfect human being. And for all I know, he abuses his kids. I'm not accusing him of that. I don't think he does.
I'm just throwing it in there.
Just, you know, and maybe he commits adultery. I don't know. JFK did. Who knows what he's doing in his personal life? But if he became president, I wouldn't say we'd have heaven on earth, but we'd get a lot closer to heaven on earth. So, you know, you're always giving the case for pessimism.
Yes.
And just like you, I like to disagree with people. So I'm giving the case for optimism. Whereas if you gave the case for optimism, I'd probably be giving the case for pessimism.
Well, you know, in the wise words of Jonathan Swift, blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. So I guess the cynic in me sort of feels that way. The key to happiness is low expectations, where I sort of agree with David Hume. Assume everyone is a knave and then be pleasantly disappointed when you meet someone who's not, rather than getting your hopes up. And I can tell you, you know, any time I've had a different view, I've always paid for it. I remember when I was in high school, and I hated high school, and most of the teachers there were shitty human beings. But I remember there was a teacher who in high school said to me, you should always, you know, if you're walking down the street, you should always smile, be polite. Who knows? Your smile might just cheer someone up. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to do that. So I was walking down the street, smiling, and some woman said to me, what are you so happy about? So I try to make you better, and I get yelled at. So this is, so I sort of stopped. But
well,
one last...
You're smiling at me right now, so I'm being cheered up by you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So one last thing, and I'm sort of curious on this. I don't care about intention that much. I think when people say they mean well, that's just an excuse when they do bad things. But I'm curious how much, in terms of morality, how much do you think intention plays a role, right? Because it seems, and certainly it seems like the objectivists in many ways would often argue that it seems to not matter like at all, almost, right? So like someone would say, oh, you know, Steve Jobs is a good person because, you know, he's inventing products that make our lives better. And I would say he's doing a good thing by inventing products that make our lives better. But for me, morality is good for the sake of being good. It's not good because you happen to benefit from it. If I see someone drowning and I save him, irrespective of, let's say, I get a reward or I get a good reputation, to me that's ethics. Where if I'm only saving him because I want a reputation and the hero acclaim, then I'm arguing that's not really doing morals, that's just benefiting me. And if I didn't care about the acclaim, then I'd let him drown. What are your thoughts?
Well, we've only got a minute or two because I've got another appointment at 11 o'clock and we're scheduled from 10 to 11. Again, I'm a moderate. I'm not a Randian or an objectivist on this. I don't say that intention mean nothing, but it doesn't mean everything.
Right.
Look,
I agree.
If I hit your car with my car by accident, I'm not I'm not committing assault and battery. It's just an accident. It's a tort. I have to pay the damages. On the other hand, if I ram my car into your car purposefully, my intentions are very different, but my actions are the same. In both cases, I ram my car into your car. The intentions are pretty darn important. On the other hand, if I'm spastic and my arms go like this and I hit you, I didn't mean to. On the other hand, if I punch you, then I'm a criminal. So intentions are certainly important, not all important, but I hate to be Walter Moderate Block, but I'm just adhering to my moderation. Intentions are important, not all important.
All right, that's a good answer. I would agree with that.
Thanks for having me on the show, and I look forward to the next time. And I really appreciate the introduction you gave me.
All right, thank you. I enjoy it as always. Great having you, Walter. Extremely moderate.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.